Welcome to this high-speed recap of a deep dive into the most pressing issue of our time, climate change. Today, host Nikhil is joined by four distinct voices. We have Navroz Dubash, a leading climate policy expert and IPCC co-author. Next is Mirik Gogri, an industrialist focusing on corporate sustainability. Then we have Bhumi Pednekar, a celebrated actor and dedicated climate advocate. Finally, we have Sunita Narain, a veteran environmental activist and director of the Center for Science and Environment. Navroz opens the conversation by reflecting on his journey from engineering to the front lines of global climate negotiations. He describes his work with the IPCC, which stands for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. He explains that this is not just a research project, but a painstaking process where governments must approve every single line of the report based on scientific consensus. Navroz notes that the world has been having the same debate about equity between rich and poor nations for over 30 years. Shifting gears to the industrial perspective, Mirik shares how he transitioned from building tech startups to managing sustainability in the heavy chemical industry. He highlights that large-scale industries are responsible for massive emissions, and the real challenge lies in moving away from coal as a primary energy source. Mirik stresses that we are currently in a decisive decade where corporate influence must be used to scale up green solutions. Building on that point, Bhumi discusses the emotional toll of the climate crisis. She explains that she launched the Climate Warrior platform to turn her personal climate anxiety into collective action. She emphasizes that the youth of India are the primary change-makers who will eventually find the solutions to save our cities from the rising tide. Sunita adds a powerful historical lens, reminding the group that environmentalism in India is fundamentally about the right to development. She recounts the Chipko movement, where women protected trees because their survival depended on them. Sunita argues that while the middle class discusses climate as a concept, farmers and fishermen are already living through the disaster. Furthermore, she critiques the current state of activism, suggesting that 30 years ago there was more bravery and less focus on mere optics. When it comes to defining the problem, Mirik describes climate change as the rate of environmental shifts that exceeds our human capacity to adapt. Navroz supports this with scientific evidence from ice cores, showing that carbon dioxide levels and temperatures are currently spiking at a rate unseen in 800,000 years. He points out that the science is settled, as modern climate models perfectly match the real-world warming we see today. Turning to the topic of transportation, Sunita explains that while the Western world views EVs as a way to clean up the grid, India needs EVs primarily to solve the air pollution crisis choking its cities. However, she warns that this transition is being hampered by a global trade war over minerals like lithium and cobalt. She also points out a major hypocrisy in global trade, noting that many wealthy nations only lowered their emissions by exporting their manufacturing to China after the WTO agreements in 2002. The conversation then dives into the potential of DRE, or decentralized renewable energy. Navroz argues that instead of just building massive solar farms, we should empower individuals to generate their own power. Sunita notes that while this is a brilliant solution, it faces stiff resistance from state electricity distribution companies, known as discoms. These entities rely on high-paying customers and fear losing revenue if people become energy independent. Expanding on the global stage, Navroz explains that the original grand bargain of climate policy has collapsed. The plan was for the rich world to lead and pay for the transition, but they have largely failed to do so. Sunita adds that the cost of capital is a massive barrier, as interest rates for green projects in the global south are significantly higher than in the north. This financial gap leaves developing nations struggling to compete in the new green economy. Regarding the future of energy, Mirik makes a strong case for nuclear power. He believes that small modular reactors are essential for providing a steady baseload of energy that renewables alone cannot yet match. Sunita remains skeptical, citing the massive costs, long construction timelines, and the inherent risks of nuclear waste and accidents. Finally, the panel tackles the controversial topic of geoengineering. Sunita dismisses the idea of spraying particles into the atmosphere to block sunlight as arrogant and dangerous madness. She argues that these techno-fixes are often just excuses for rich nations to keep emitting carbon. Navroz agrees, warning that such measures could have unforecasted impacts on global weather patterns like the Indian monsoon. In closing, the experts urge young entrepreneurs to stop looking for technical moonshots and start solving gritty social problems. They agree that the real revolution lies in imagination, policy reform, and scaling up the solutions we already have. That wraps up this intense breakdown of the climate conversation. Thanks for listening, and stay energized for the transition ahead.